Hey, it's Andrew Shackleton from LePage, Wolle Realty here. Today I want to take you through a purchase agreement. I want to show you how it works from start to finish. This document's 6 or 7 pages of very stressful stuff if you're a new buyer, so I thought this would really help you. Anyways, we're on page 1 of the agreement of purchase sale. The first half of the page is just basic information about when the deal's being done, who the buyer is, who the seller is. They've got what's known as the real property box, and this is the address, the basic lot size, and most importantly, the legal description from Land Registry. In this case, it's Part Lot 3, Plan 410, Part 2, 61R 5190 Waterloo. That's the legal description, just so there's no uncertainty about what property you're buying. So, right below that's the purchase price, $675,000 in numerals and also written out. And then we've got the deposit. In this case, the deposit's $10,000. It says payable upon acceptance. But like all things in real estate, upon acceptance doesn't mean upon acceptance. It means within 24 hours of acceptance. Your other choices are herewith, which means right at the time of the offer, or you put in deposits payable according to Schedule A, and there'd be a little write-up on page 6 or 7. So those are your 3 choices. The deposit check's going to be paid out to LePage, Wolle Realty. They're the listing brokerage, and that's held in a trust account. Below that, we talk about the rest of the agreement. There's Schedule A, and you can put B, C, D, E, or whatever in here. In our case, we've only got Schedule A. I'll get to that at page 6 and page 7 of this particular agreement. The deal is irrevocable by the buyer until 11 p.m. on the 22nd of August. What that means is you've put this offer forward to the seller, and you can't back out of it until after 11 p.m. At 11 p.m., the deal dies. So this is a way of people, being committed to moving forward on this purchase. The completion date is when the property actually closes, and we've said, okay, this is going to close on November 1st, 2018. Page 2, at the top, we just talk about sending and receiving notices. When you're working as an agent for a buyer or seller, there's documents that are going to be exchanged between the parties in order to get the deal done. The seller, he's John Doe at otherbrokerage.com. I'm the buyer, Andrew at druidhome.com. So that's our addresses, so we can send documents to each other. Chattels, this is stuff that's being included with the sale. In this case, fridge, stove, dishwasher, clothes dryer, and washer. We've included them. Other things that might be included, you've got some extra space to write that down. In this particular deal, there's nothing excluded, like fixtures excluded. This would be something like, say somebody's got a hot tub. They're going to take it with them. They would write in here hot tub. And then in this agreement that that hot tub is not included in the deal. Below that, we've got rental items. Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Guelph. Almost everybody rents their water heater because they don't last. The water's hard here. So we've got a rental water heater. The buyer's going to take on that contract when the seller sells their property. And then the last thing on this page is HST. Residential resale, there's never HST on the sale price. But in the case of the document, if there was HST, we're saying it's included in the purchase price so that the buyer doesn't have to deal with paying out any extra monies. That's all that is. Okay, at the top of this, we've got title search. This is pretty important. The lawyers need to look at all the legal documents pertaining to the property to make sure the title is sound, to make sure everything is above board. They need a certain amount of time to do that before closing. So we've said the 7th of October. That's 3 weeks before closing. It gives the lawyers the time they need to do their job. And we've said that the usage of the property is residential. If it was a commercial business, we'd write in here commercial, but this is a house. Future use. We're saying that we make no claim on what the future use of the property will be. There could be a zoning change, but that's not our concern. So future use, we're making no claims about it. Number 10 is pretty important. This is title. And the title paragraph there basically says you've got to abide by any rules and regulations that the current owner is, abiding by. In other words, if you can't park motorhomes in your driveway or you can't have a wash line in the backyard, if the present owner is abiding by those rules, you have to as well. The other thing it says is things like, Bell Canada or the gas company, if they've got to come in and dig up your lawn to fix stuff, you have to allow them to do that. That's known as an easement, and utilities are pretty much always granted easements over people's properties. They have to repair everything they tear up, but they also can get in when they need to do the necessary work that they do. The last thing is, If this title is found unsound or there's some kind of deficiencies that can be remedied, the seller's given the opportunity to repair that title to make it sound for the buyer. If they can't do that, the buyer gets their deposit back and they're out of the deal. So that's what this is. It's a pretty important paragraph. Closing arrangements. This is all how the lawyers do the back and forth upon closing, how they register title, discharge the mortgage, and then finally register the new title with the new buyers. That's all how they do it, and this is all legalese about their particular profession. Documents and discharge. What this is saying is any mortgages on the property will be discharged by the seller, and the documents they're talking about are documents in the seller's possession. The buyer can't ask the seller for a bunch of new documents. They can't say all of a sudden, okay, now I want a survey. The buyer can only ask the seller for whatever documents they currently have in their possession. That's that one. Inspection. This is pretty important. The reason it's highlighted in black is because it's really important. We're giving you an opportunity as a buyer to get an inspection on this property. And this is saying it again in black. Get an inspection of the property if you want to. This way, buyers are protected. Last thing, this is about insurance. Obviously, when you buy a property, if it burns down before closing, it's still the seller's property. The seller's got to keep insurance on that property upon closing. And if there was a fire, for example, there's usually a couple different ways they can do it. They could pay out the buyer, make him good, or they could repair the property and make the buyer good that way. Those are the two things that happen. Typically, it's up to the insurance company, it's up to the parties involved. The other thing is, obviously, the buyer's got to get insurance on that property for closing, otherwise the bank's not going to give them a mortgage. So it's pretty cut and dry and simple as far as that goes. Okay, top one says Planning Act. You can't use the property for anything that's against the Planning Act. If it's against the Planning Act, there's no deal. Second thing, document preparation. Documents have to be prepared for title transfer at the seller's expense. Any mortgages being discharged that are what's known as a seller take-back mortgage has to be paid for at the expense of the buyer. So that's that. Residency, this is pretty important. If you're a seller and you're a foreigner, you might owe the government capital gains. The government wants to make sure that they get their money. So the buyer will hold back whatever portion of the sale price the government is owed so that they're not on the hook. This is really, really important. Again, that's for the lawyers to check out, but you have to be aware of that. Adjustments. Adjustments are for property taxes and utilities. Say, for example, the seller's paid the taxes for the entire year and you bought the property in June. You would owe him 6 months worth of taxes. That's what's known as an adjustment, and that applies to utilities and all the other stuff. This is stuff that lawyers deal with on closing. Property assessment. MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, they set what they think a property is worth for setting property taxes. It has no bearing on what properties are going for on the real estate market. And so we're saying there's no connection between what the government of Ontario does and what your property is being sold for. That's simple. Time limits. If it says in the contract something has to be done by 6 p.m. on a particular date, you have to get it done at that time. You can't fudge this stuff. If there's a time limit, you've got to adhere to it. Tender. Tender is the term lawyers use, legal tender. It's about transferring documents and funds. It's got to be tenderable. In other words, you've got to be able to move it around. Family Law Act. If you're selling a property and there's a spouse involved and they're not on title, you've got to respect their rights under the Family Law Act. This will come up again in page 5. There's a box you check off and sign. UFI. Urea foam formaldehyde insulation. They haven't used this stuff in 30 years, but it still comes up in real estate deals because people back then in the 80s were scared of this stuff. It gave off a toxic gas. It's not an issue anymore, but we still require sellers to disclose that this stuff was in the property. Legal, accounting, and environmental advice. I'm not a lawyer. If you need a lawyer, get a lawyer. I'm not an environmental guy. If you're worried about environmental concerns, hire somebody. And lastly, I'm not an accountant. I can give you advice on properties, but if you want financial advice, get an accountant. That's just that, I'll help you with getting the people, but I don't do it myself. Consumer reports. If you're getting a mortgage, they're going to do a credit check on you. And you're saying you acknowledge that. That's what that is. They dig into you pretty good if they're going to lend you money. And then the second last thing, agreement in writing. If you're going to make changes to the contract, it's got to be in writing. You can't make a phone call and think that's okay, I've talked to my broker. It's got to be done in writing, it's got to be signed. That's all that says. And then the last thing, time and date. If we're doing a deal here in Kitchener-Waterloo, it's got to be Kitchener-Waterloo's time and date. It can't be Honolulu time. And the thing is, I've actually had this happen. I had a seller in Calgary, and we were doing a deal here. There was a 3-hour time difference. They've got to adhere to the time zone where the actual property is being sold. This is a pretty important page. This is where we sign. At the top is where the buyer signs. The next place is where the seller signs. But at the top it says successors and assigns. If you die, God forbid, your heirs have to honor this contract. That's just how it is. That's why it says successors. That's how that goes. So you got the buyer, the seller, they sign rather. But the deal's not done until we get 2 things done. If you're married or you've got someone common law and they've got rights to the property, they've got to sign off on the spousal consent. And then last thing's what's known as a confirmation of acceptance. If buyer and seller are all happy and everything's been done, there's been back and forth, and finally we've got a deal that both sides agree upon, then they sign this confirmation of acceptance, and that locks in the deal firm. There's 2 more pages we've got to go through, but this is the final one. This is what does it. The last bit here, this is just office stuff. You've got information about the brokerages. You've got who the buyer and seller are using for lawyers and the fact you're going to allow those lawyers to get the documents. And then the last thing in the commission trust agreement is how the agents get paid for doing the deal. So most of the stuff that's important is this top half. And now we'll get to the last 2 pages. This is Schedule A, which I mentioned earlier. They're really, really important as well because it's kind of like the nitty-gritty of the contract is in Schedule A. So here we go. Here's page 6 of 7. Schedule A in this case is 2 pages. The first bit just says the buyer's going to pay the balance of the purchase price upon closing. The next 3 things are an inspection clause, an insurance clause, and a mortgage clause. And it says they've got until Friday at 6 p.m. to get these 3 things met. If the buyer is unsuccessful at getting a mortgage, getting the insurance, and getting the property inspection done, or they find there's something wrong with the property during the inspection, then the buyer gets out of this contract if they choose. It's done, they get their money back for their deposit, they go on to something else. That's what these 3 conditions do. I put in 2 other things rather, that are just kind of housekeeping things on the next page of Schedule A, so let's have a look. The last couple things I put in here, like I said, they're housekeeping things. I'm saying essentially that the seller is agreeing that the dishwasher, all the stuff they're providing with the house is going to be in good working order upon closing. In other words, when the buyer takes over the house, the furnace is going to still work, the AC is still going to work, the dishwasher is going to work, and if any of these things are broken upon closing, the seller's on the hook for getting it fixed. That's what that big paragraph's about. The last couple things below that are just, I asked for 2 walkthrough inspections just for peace of mind. You buy a house, it's stressful. So I want to give my clients the most peace of mind I can. So I get a couple walkthrough inspections. They get to go through a week before closing or whatever they want, bring a tape measure for drapes, and just calm themselves down and be happy. That's what those are for. And then finally, the last thing, making sure that the seller keeps the place clean. I've asked that the property is in clean, broom-swept condition upon closing so that my buyer doesn't walk into a mess. Anyways, that's it. That's your agreement of purchase and sale. I hope this helped you. If you want to buy a house, give me a call, 226-600-1548. Thanks for watching.